Before we dive into today's story, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below about what you'd do if you came face to face with the universe's deadliest predator. Trust me, you'll want to stick around until the end because what happens in this chamber leaves the entire Galactic Council speechless. Now let's begin. The chamber of the Galactic Council glittered like a cathedral of stars. 1,000 crystalline lights hovered high above, casting fractured rainbows over walls lined with silver alloy and glass so clear it gave the illusion of open space. Delegates from 100 worlds murmured among themselves, their voices echoing through the cavernous hall. Beneath all that grandeur, however, the air was thick with unease. For all the pageantry, tonight was not a night of celebration. It was a trial by fear. Captain Elias Ward walked into the chamber without ceremony. No entourage, no elaborate banners, no bodyguards, just a man in a dark uniform that had been pressed so many times the fabric bore a permanent sheen. His stride was neither slow nor hurried, it was deliberate, steady, almost dismissive of the hostile stares that followed him. The other representatives sat encased in their finery, scaled robes that shifted like liquid metal, armored shells polished with obsidian oils, exosuits that hissed softly as their wearers flexed translucent limbs. Elias was a contrast so stark it verged on insulting. To them he was plain, primitive, a mammal draped in cloth. Yet his presence was not an accident. Humanity's inclusion in the council was still debated fiercely across the galaxy. Many saw Earth as an upstart species, barely clawing its way into space. Others, however, whispered that humans carried a quality more dangerous than advanced weapons or fleets, a refusal to kneel. Elias embodied that whisper. From a row of obsidian thrones, a delegate with skin like molten gold leaned toward her peer. "That's him? The human they've chosen?" Her voice was soft, but the chamber's acoustics carried every syllable. "Ridiculous," muttered the peer, a being with 6 eyes arranged in a perfect circle around a skull crested with feathers. "We call a summit to discuss the predator scourge and they send that?" Elias kept walking. His boots tapped against the crystalline floor, each step echoing like a gavel striking wood. He reached the central platform, a dais reserved for speakers. Without waiting for invitation, he turned and faced the crowd. His posture was casual, hands folded behind his back, chin level. He looked less like a representative and more like a man waiting in line at a train station. The council chair, a vast being suspended in a sphere of liquid, its body a shifting mass of bioluminescent tendrils, pulsed irritably. "Captain Ward, humanity has been granted presence as observers only. You are not authorized to address the council." "I'm not here to talk," Elias replied. His voice was low, even, carrying easily through the chamber. "I'm here to listen. Watching's free last I checked." Gasps, hisses, mutters. Insults slithered through translation devices, some audible in dozens of languages at once. But Elias remained immovable, eyes fixed on the chair with the faintest flicker of a smile, like a man testing the patience of a teacher. The tension thickened. Then the sound came. A tremor first, subtle enough that the delegates thought it was a trick of nerves. But it grew, a deep resonance that rattled glass and made the chamber's lights flicker. The floor itself seemed to shudder with each vibration. The council fell silent. Every delegate knew that rhythm. It was not machinery. It was footsteps. The apex predator was arriving. Even the chair's luminous body dimmed. "Proceed with caution," it ordered. "Ensure its restraints hold." The doors at the far end of the hall parted with a mechanical groan. A cadre of armored handlers marched forward, their heavy exosuits clanking, their weapons glowing with containment charges. Between them walked the beast. It dwarfed them all. A silhouette first, massive shoulders, a hunched spine lined with jagged ridges, a tail that scraped sparks against the crystalline floor. As it entered the chamber fully, gasps erupted. The apex predator's 4 eyes burned like coals in the shadows. Its skin shimmered between scales and plated armor, black as void, with streaks of deep crimson pulsing like veins of fire. Each breath it exhaled fogged the air, though the chamber was climate-controlled. Some delegates recoiled into their thrones, others activated personal shields. A few left entirely, unwilling to share oxygen with it. The handlers tightened their grips on electromagnetic chains fastened around its limbs, though the creature moved as if the restraints were ornamental. Elias watched, unflinching. The predator's head swept across the chamber. Its gaze landed on clusters of trembling delegates, lips pulling back to reveal serrated fangs. The sound it made was not quite a growl, not quite a hiss, but something primal and layered, as though multiple throats sang in unison. "Contain it!" shrieked a representative, his segmented body curling tighter into his exosuit. "If it breaks free, this chamber is lost." Elias tilted his head slightly. To most, the noise was terror incarnate. To him, it was oddly familiar. He remembered standing on the edge of the Everglades as a teenager, hearing the low, guttural rumble of an alligator just before it broke the water's surface. Same vibration. Same threat display. Same promise of violence. The handlers activated their charge rods. The predator snarled as arcs of blue energy coursed through its bindings. It shook once, muscles flexing, and the chains groaned. A sickening realization swept the chamber. The restraints would not hold for long. The chair's voice thundered. "Bring it forward. Let the council witness the terror that devours worlds." The handlers obeyed, dragging the predator toward the central platform. Its claws gouged deep furrows in the crystalline floor, sparks flashing under each step. The delegates shouted protests, some activating drones, others hiding behind guards. Panic was spreading fast. Elias, however, stepped closer to the platform's edge. His eyes narrowed, not in fear but in study. He examined the creature's gait, the way its eyes darted, the subtle twitch in its tail. He was reading it the way one might read the posture of a wolf before it lunges. "You should step back," one handler barked at him, voice muffled inside his suit. "This isn't a spectacle. It's a monster." Elias didn't move. His voice was calm. "Funny thing about monsters, sometimes they're just animals in the wrong room." The predator halted as if it had heard him. Its 4 eyes locked onto Elias, burning with intelligence that unsettled even the bravest in the chamber. The handlers froze, uncertain whether to pull it away or prepare for the charge they felt coming. The moment stretched thin, tension wound so tight it felt like a string ready to snap. Every breath in the hall was held, every eye fixated on the impossible tableau. One unarmed man standing before the deadliest predator known to the galaxy. Then, slowly, deliberately, the predator lowered its head, inhaling deeply. The sound reverberated like thunder rolling across a valley. Elias did not flinch. He stood his ground, eyes steady, shoulders squared. For the first time since its capture, the predator did not struggle against its bindings. It only watched him. The council chamber fell into silence so profound the hum of the lights overhead became deafening. And in that silence, the seed of something impossible was planted. That the apex predator, scourge of systems, feared by empires, had found one being it did not immediately wish to kill. The chair's tendrils flickered uncertainly. "End this session. Secure the chamber. This requires deliberation." The handlers, trembling inside their armored suits, hesitated to move. Even they sensed it. A line had been crossed, a rhythm disturbed. Something fundamental had shifted, though no one yet understood what. Elias took a single step forward. Just one. The predator's tail lashed, claws flexing against the floor. But it did not strike. The council erupted into panicked voices, all at once, a cacophony of fear and accusation. Elias simply folded his arms across his chest and let the chaos swell around him. He did not need to speak. His silence was a weapon sharper than any blade. And though the chamber would empty in a storm of panic and outrage, though the delegates would scatter to whisper about danger and impossibility, one truth lingered in the crystalline air. The deadliest predator in the galaxy had chosen to pause before a mere man. That pause was the kind of thing empires toppled over. The chamber did not breathe. Delegates clutched the edges of their thrones, some whispering frantic prayers, others preparing emergency escape pods hidden in the floors beneath them. The apex predator stood rigid at the platform's center, its 4 eyes locked unerringly on Elias Ward. The human had not moved except to square his stance, as though the creature's bulk and glistening fangs were no more than a storm cloud waiting to break. A handler raised his containment rod and barked, "Keep your distance. One wrong step and it will." The predator moved before he could finish. A convulsive twist of its torso, muscles like coiled steel snapping outward, and the electromagnetic chains tore apart in showers of sparks. The sound rattled the chamber like a gunshot, drowning out the screams that erupted from 100 alien throats. The handlers stumbled back, weapons flashing as they discharged containment bolts into the creature's hide. Blue arcs wrapped its frame, searing across scales, but instead of falling it simply roared. The roar was deafening, not just a sound but a force, a pressure wave that made glass fracture in the walls above. Aliens collapsed under the vibration, clawed at their ears, or scrambled in terrified desperation toward the exits. Through it all Elias stood steady, his gaze never wavering. He measured the timing of the roar, the angle of its body, the flex of its claws gouging into crystal. The predator was not striking at random. It was testing the boundaries of the room, measuring who feared it and who did not. The council chair's voice boomed, desperate now. Kill it. Kill it before it slaughters us all. Blades unfolded from the handler's exocets, weapons humming with plasma heat. They surged forward, though every motion screamed reluctance. Few had survived encounters with this monster. Their only hope was to die slowly enough to buy the council a few seconds more. The predator swiped with one massive claw, and 3 exocets flew across the chamber like toys hurled by a child. They struck the walls with bone-shattering force. Sparks and fractured crystal sprayed across the room. The remaining handlers froze, morale already broken. They wanted no part of this. Their retreat left the platform bare save for Elias and the beast itself. Elias took a breath, the sound barely audible against the chaos. He stepped forward. The council shouted in unison, voices cracking through translators. Humans, stop. You'll be killed. Get back, fool. This is madness. He ignored them. The predator swung its head down, jaws spreading wide enough to crush him in a single snap. Its breath was searing, heavy with iron and heat. The edges of its teeth glistened like wet obsidian. Elias did not step back. He spoke instead, his voice almost conversational. You're not angry. You're cornered. The chamber could not comprehend the words. The delegates hissed and screeched in disbelief. To them it looked like lunacy, a primitive mammal daring to talk to the scourge of systems. Yet the predator paused. Its jaw did not close. Its breath poured over him, hot as a desert wind, but its eyes narrowed, studying. Elias raised his hand slowly, deliberately, palm outward. The tiniest motion of patience. Not submission, not threat. Something else. The council grew louder, terror spiraling. Some demanded the chamber be evacuated. Others screamed for automated defenses to fire. The chair's tendrils writhed with fury. Contain him. Remove the human. But none dared move. The predator's muscles tensed again. Its claws shredded more of the floor as it shifted its weight forward, inch by inch, until its snout was almost touching Elias's chest. The silence of anticipation stretched so taut it could snap. Then it lunged. The motion was instantaneous, violent, a blur of spines and scales. Gasps turned to shrieks. Several delegates collapsed, convinced they had just witnessed a man reduced to pieces. But when the dust settled, Elias still stood. His hand rested against the creature's snout. The predator froze, mid-swipe, claws still extended, jaws still parted. The only movement was the rise and fall of its chest, its breath washing hot over him. Elias's palm pressed firmly into the ridged texture of its hide. His other hand rose and brushed the side of its jaw, tracing along a groove in its scales where plasma burns had scarred tissue. His voice was calm, almost quiet enough to be mistaken for thought. You've been caged too long, haven't you? The impossible was happening in full view of the galaxy's rulers. The deadliest predator they had ever known, the destroyer of colonies, breaker of fleets, had halted its fury at the touch of one unarmed human. The chamber was paralyzed. Weapons hung frozen in midair, throats locked mid-scream, eyes wide with horror and disbelief. The council chair dimmed its bioluminescence, a physical manifestation of sheer confusion. Elias stroked the snout once more, fingers tracing along its jagged ridges. The predator's eyes, 4 blazing orbs that had burned with hatred, softened. Its growl subsided into a rumble that sounded content, almost like a purr distorted through layers of thunder. Elias's lips twitched upward, the ghost of a smile. That's better. The chamber erupted again, but this time the panic had changed flavor. It was no longer fear of imminent death. It was terror at what they were witnessing, terror of implications that shredded every rule they believed in. Delegates shouted over one another, voices shaking with hysteria. No creature obeys. This is sorcery. Humans are more dangerous than we thought. End him. End them both before it's too late. Elias ignored them all. He kept his hand pressed against the predator's jaw until its massive frame lowered, crouching so that its head aligned more easily with his reach. Its tail, once lashing with fury, now coiled loosely, the motion slow, relaxed. The human captain stood calmly before the most feared creature in the known galaxy, and for the first time since its capture, the predator looked tame. The council's noise became background static. For Elias, the world had shrunk to the rhythm of the beast's breath, the steady thrum beneath its skin, the way its eyes flicked between him and the panicked crowd. He saw intelligence there and recognition. A dangerous, fragile bond. He leaned in slightly, voice low but sharp enough to carry across the hushed chamber. You're not their monster. Not mine either. You're just tired of being treated like a weapon. The predator rumbled in reply, the sound reverberating through the floor. Several delegates fainted, convinced it was preparing another roar. Yet Elias recognized the difference. That was no threat. It was acknowledgement. The handlers, quivering in their broken exosuits, dared not move. They had no orders for this. No training. No courage left to intervene. The chair finally spoke, its tendrils quivering violently. This is an abomination. Remove that human. Destroy the creature at once. But even as its words echoed, no one obeyed. No one dared fire into the tableau because what if the creature retaliated? What if the human's strange control was the only thing keeping them alive? Elias shifted his hand one last time, brushing along the ridge above the predator's eye. The great beast closed its jaws, lowered its head further and remained still. The silence was suffocating. And in that silence, Elias spoke a single sentence that cut through the panic like a blade. You see a monster. I see something else. Every delegate in the chamber felt it, the fracture line in their understanding, the glimpse of a possibility too dangerous to name. The section closed not with violence, but with the unbearable weight of that pause. A mere man and a galactic terror, standing side by side in defiance of everything the council thought it knew. The chamber smelled of ozone and scorched crystal, the aftermath of broken restraints and discharged weapons still hanging in the air. Delegates trembled within their seats, every gaze fixed on the impossible sight before them. The apex predator crouched like an obedient hound, its colossal head resting mere inches from a man's hand. The council's voices had withered to whispers, disbelief leaving them unable to shout. Elias Ward stood still, one palm firm against the creature's snout, his other hand tracing the ridges that lined its jaw. His touch was not hurried or tentative. It was deliberate, the kind of steady motion that came from experience, not madness. He moved with the same ease as someone calming a nervous horse, or kneeling by a restless wolf. To him the beast was not death incarnate, it was simply another living thing watching him for cues, waiting for meaning. The predator shifted its weight, scales grinding softly against the crystalline floor. Delegates flinched, convinced it was preparing another strike. But instead of lunging, it leaned closer, pressing the weight of its skull gently into Elias's palm. The sound it released was low, vibrating through the platform like a deep engine hum. It was not a growl. Not a threat. It was something softer, almost content. A delegate with a crown of obsidian feathers shrieked, "This cannot be. It answers to no master. Whole armies perish before its claws." And yet, another rasped, their translucent carapace trembling, "Look at it. The beast submits. To a human." The chair's bioluminescence flickered erratically, caught between fury and dread. This is illusion, some trick of pheromones or technology. Nothing more. But Elias finally turned his head toward the rows of horrified faces, and the faintest smile touched his lips. "No trick," he said calmly. "Just trust." The words carried a weight far greater than their syllables. He spoke them without grandeur, but in the silence of the chamber they struck like thunder. The predator shifted again, lowering its body until it sprawled across the platform, tail curling lazily. Its claws, which moments ago had carved gouges into crystalline stone, now tapped softly, rhythmically, like the idle twitch of a creature at rest. Then it did something none had ever recorded. It rolled partially to its side, exposing its armored chest and vulnerable underside. A submission. A ripple of horror surged through the council. Species whose entire militaries had been obliterated by this monster now watched it bare its weakness to a single human touch. The contradictions were too great to process. Elias knelt slowly, one knee pressing against the cool floor. He placed his hand against the exposed scales, running his fingers across scarred grooves where energy weapons had failed to pierce. His voice softened. "They call you Apex. I just see an animal. Strong, yes. Dangerous, sure. But not evil." The predator released a sound that vibrated like distant thunder, but gentler now, resonant. To Elias it was unmistakable, the sound of acknowledgement. To the council it was blasphemy. "Impossible," a delegate roared, tentacles flailing in disbelief. "This is corruption of natural law. Destroy them both." Others shouted over him, some calling for execution, others demanding research, a few whispering with newfound fear. If humans could do this, then what else were they capable of? The handlers, battered and terrified, did not approach. Their weapons hung useless at their sides. They were soldiers trained to fight anything, but not this. Not the spectacle of a predator taming itself before a man with empty hands. Elias ignored the outrage. His eyes remained fixed on the creature beside him, his hand steady against its armored chest. He remembered long nights back on Earth, sitting silently as wolves circled his campfire, letting them see he was no threat unless threatened. He remembered a lion cub pressing its head into his palm during his military service overseas, its golden eyes trusting despite the distance between their species. Every lesson of those moments lived in this one. Fear is earned, trust is shared. You've been fighting because they expect you to, Elias murmured, more to the creature than to the council. They call you monster so you act the part. But you don't want war any more than I do you? The predator's eyes flicked once, glowing coals settling into an unnerving calm. It lowered its head further until it rested against Elias's shoulder. The massive weight forced him to brace, but he did not falter. Gasps filled the chamber. Whole civilizations had perished under that skull, entire fleets scattered to dust. Now it rested like a weary hound against the shoulder of a man they dismissed as primitive. The chair's voice cracked into the air, brittle with desperation. This cannot continue. If such a bond exists, the balance of power shifts. Humanity cannot be allowed this advantage. Elias looked up, his expression hardening. You misunderstand. This isn't about power. It's about respect. Something you've never given, to us or to it. The words struck deep, resonating through the delegates. For a moment no one spoke. Each species had their own histories of domination, conquest, survival. None had ever imagined that the so-called monsters might respond to something as simple as respect. The predator exhaled slowly, hot breath washing over Elias in a steady rhythm. Its body relaxed fully now, stretching across the platform, the tension gone. Its purr-like resonance filled the chamber, steady and hypnotic. Elias straightened, one hand still resting against the creature's hide, and cast his gaze across the hall. You called it unstoppable. You chained it. You tortured it. And it fought because that's all you offered. But the moment you stop treating everything different as a threat, maybe you'll find you're not as civilized as you think. The delegates recoiled at his audacity. To speak down to the council itself, to claim moral ground in a chamber where humanity had been allowed only as observers, it was a declaration of defiance they could not ignore. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the silence before storms. The realization that the universe had just shifted beneath their feet, and the one who had moved it was a mere man with nothing but an outstretched hand. Elias let the silence linger. He did not need to press further, the image was enough. The predator, once the nightmare of countless worlds, lay at ease under his touch, and the council could not erase what they had seen. The chair dimmed its glow to the faintest flicker, its authority trembling. This assembly will recess. Deliberations must be made. But no order could erase the truth. The sight would be burned into every mind present, carried back to every homeworld, replayed endlessly in whispers and broadcasts. Elias knew it. He kept his eyes on the predator, hand steady, heart calm. He had not come here to speak, but his silence had said more than words ever could. The chamber emptied slowly, filled with mutters, fear and disbelief. Only Elias and the predator remained in the center, man and beast framed in fractured starlight. And as the last delegate's footsteps faded, the predator closed its eyes as though finally, for the first time in its existence, it could rest. The story was no longer about the monster. It was about the man who had dared to touch it. The council chamber felt smaller now, though nothing in its vast architecture had changed. The delegates had returned after a brief recess, their thrones arranged in towering circles around the central platform where Elias Ward still stood with the apex predator at his side. The creature lay coiled like a mountain of muscle and scale, its 4 eyes half closed but alert, its presence radiating menace even in repose. No chains bound it now. The only tether was the steady hand of the human who stroked its ridged snout as if it were a trusted companion. The silence was no longer stunned, it was charged. Every breath, every whisper carried the weight of consequence. What had been an inexplicable moment was now a crisis that demanded resolution. Empires had fallen for far less than what these delegates had witnessed. The chair pulsed with agitation, its bioluminescent tendrils brightening and dimming erratically. This aberration must be addressed. If humanity has discovered a means to subjugate the apex, then they are a threat to all civilized species. Elias tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Subjugate? That's not what this is. You've spent centuries trying to control what you don't understand. You cage, you shock, you fear. You call it civilization, but it's just domination with prettier words. The statement rippled through the chamber like an electric current. Some delegates shouted in fury, others whispered in dread. One armored representative slammed a clawed fist against their throne's armrest. He dares lecture us while harboring a living weapon. Not a weapon, Elias countered calmly, his hand never leaving the beast's hide. An ally. And maybe a better one than most of you have been to each other. The predator rumbled softly as though echoing his words. Several delegates recoiled at the sound, their instincts screaming that such a noise preceded slaughter. But the human didn't flinch, and that steadiness unsettled them more than the roar itself. A delegate with translucent wings stood, her voice sharp. If this bond exists, humanity becomes the most dangerous species in the galaxy. What stops them from taming every terror we cannot? Elias's gaze swept across the assembly. Nothing stops us if that's what we wanted. But you've missed the point. We didn't tame it. We treated it with respect. Something none of you tried. The council erupted, the chamber filling with overlapping accusations and panic. Words like war, extermination, and preemptive strike rang out in dozens of tongues. Whole clusters of delegates turned on each other, arguing about whether humanity should be destroyed, isolated, or studied like the very predator beside them. The chair struck the platform with a thunderous pulse of light. Order. This discord shames the council. We will resolve this matter with clarity. Its glowing body flared brighter. The human must be detained. The predator terminated. Only then can balance be restored. The predator's eyes opened fully, all four orbs glowing like embers reignited. Its claws flexed against the floor, scraping deep grooves into the crystal. Elias placed a firm hand on its neck, grounding it with a touch. Try it, he said evenly, his eyes locked on the chair. And see how quickly you learn who's really in control here. The words froze the chamber. For the first time, the human's defiance carried not just calm but threat. And the terrifying part was that no one doubted his ability to follow through, not with the apex predator shifting its weight protectively at his side. A delegate from a warlike reptilian species rose, scales flashing crimson. I vote execution. If humanity is allowed to rise unchecked, no empire is safe. Another, thin and spectral, countered with a hiss. Execution ensures war. The image has already spread. Billions have seen the predator submit. Strike him down and you prove their fear correct, that we destroy what we cannot understand. The debate escalated, voices climbing higher, threats traded between species that had once been allies. Old rivalries resurfaced. The chamber shook with the weight of clashing egos, each one more afraid than the last of what humanity's example meant. Elias waited until the storm had nearly reached its breaking point. Then he raised his voice, not loud but cutting through the chaos with absolute clarity. You fear humanity because we remind you of the truth you've buried. You built your council on control. You call it peace, but it's just chains made pretty with protocol. The moment something doesn't bend to your will, you destroy it. Dozens of alien eyes fixed on him, hatred mingling with reluctant attention. He pressed on. Earth never had that luxury. We grew up surrounded by predators bigger, faster, stronger than us. We didn't conquer them all, we learned to live alongside them. Sometimes we fought, sometimes we bled, but we survived because we adapted. We learned respect. That's why this, he gestured to the beast beside him, isn't surprising to me. It's only surprising to you because you forgot what it means to face something you can't control. The predator pressed its head closer to Elias, a gesture so intimate it bordered on trust. The visual tore through the chamber like a dagger. For every delegate, the implication was clear. Humanity carried a secret strength none of them had considered, one rooted not in weapons or fleets but in something more primal. The chair's tendrils flickered with desperation. This is heresy. You claim humans are destined to guide predators, to command monsters. It cannot be permitted. Elias's eyes narrowed. Not destined. Chosen. By the predator itself. You saw it. That single sentence was enough to shatter the fragile balance. Half the chamber broke into shouts demanding immediate war, the other half arguing that humanity must be courted, studied, perhaps even allied with. In minutes, the council no longer resembled a unified body but a battlefield of words and accusations. Through it all, Elias remained still, a calm center in the storm. His silence forced them to reckon not with his arguments, but with the undeniable truth of the image before them, the deadliest creature known to the galaxy resting docilely at his side. Finally the chair dimmed, its voice hollow. This assembly cannot resolve the question tonight. The matter will continue in private chambers. Until then, the human and the beast are confined to the platform under guard. Guards in glistening armor surrounded the dais, weapons trained nervously on Elias and the predator. The delegates departed in clusters, their arguments spilling into corridors, echoing through translation devices to their homeworlds. What had been a council united now fractured visibly, the seeds of division already sprouting into chaos. When the last of them had gone, Elias crouched beside the predator, his hand resting against its massive chest. Its breathing was steady now, almost calm, as though it understood the chamber's fury was not aimed at it but at the man who had chosen to see it differently. Elias whispered just for the creature. "They don't know what to do with either of us. Good. Let them wonder." The beast rumbled low, a sound that reverberated deep into the floor and curled tighter beside him. Elias leaned back against the platform, exhaling slowly. Around him, weapons hummed, soldiers trembled, and empires teetered on the edge of panic. Yet he looked oddly at peace. The council had not realized it yet, but a truth was already loose in the galaxy, carried on every broadcast and every whisper, that the most feared predator alive had lowered its head to a human hand. And truths, once released, could never be caged again. The chamber was dark now, emptied of delegates, emptied of noise, yet alive with tension. The guards still circled the platform with weapons trained, though none dared step closer than 10 paces. Their armor gleamed in the half-light, but their hands twitched on their triggers, betraying nerves they could not master. Elias Ward sat cross-legged on the crystal floor, his back against the massive body of the apex predator, the beast curled like a living mountain at his side. Its breathing was steady, a rhythm so deep it seemed to shake the very air. He had not spoken since the council departed, yet his silence weighed heavier than speeches. The predator shifted, raising its head just enough to look at him. For a moment, it was not a terror of legend but something older, wilder, yet intimate. Elias brushed his hand along its scales and it rumbled, satisfied. The guards tightened their grips. Elias smiled faintly as if mocking their fear. From the far wall, the chair's voice returned, projected through a shimmering veil of light. "Human Elias Ward. Your image has already escaped containment. Entire systems have seen it. The council burns with discord. Do you understand what you've done?" Elias tilted his head, studying the hologram. "I didn't release the image. You did the second you called me here. You wanted a display of power. You got one. Just not the one you expected." The chair's glow dimmed, tones sharp with unease. "Your kind now threatens the balance of civilizations. Empires will not wait for debate. They will prepare for war." Elias's eyes hardened. "Then they'll be making the same mistake you all made with this creature. You look at anything stronger than you and think the only answer is chains or annihilation. But there's another path. You just can't imagine it because it doesn't start with fear." The predator growled at the hologram and the guards flinched backward. Elias continued softly, his voice cutting sharper for its calm. "What you fear isn't the beast. It isn't even me. It's that your people will see this and realize humanity did something you could not. We earned trust where you demanded obedience." The chair hesitated, flickering, then asked almost reluctantly, "And what if the galaxy does follow your example?" Elias glanced down at the predator, which pressed its head closer to his shoulder. His voice was steady, deliberate. "Then maybe for the first time in your long history, you won't have to live in fear of the things you can't control." The words carried weight beyond the chamber. Unknown to Elias, the council's emergency feeds were no longer locked. The recording of this exchange streamed across networks, across empires, across billions of eyes hungry for meaning. Miners paused in shafts to watch. Soldiers gathered in barracks. Children leaned into glowing screens. Across the stars, the image of a man stroking the most dreaded predator alive while challenging the council spread like fire. In outposts and capitals, reactions erupted. Some shouted that humanity must be destroyed before they spread this heresy. Others whispered with awe, their voices trembling with something dangerously close to hope. On worlds long suppressed by council decrees, people began asking why they obeyed so readily when a human dared defy and live. The council had sought to isolate a scandal, but instead they had sparked a revolution of thought. Back in the chamber, the chair's voice grew taut with fury. "You endanger everything. This creature will spark uprisings, bloodshed, the unraveling of order." Elias rose slowly, the predator lifting with him, a wall of muscle and menace at his side. He stepped forward, forcing the guards to retreat though he carried no weapon but presence. His voice cut through the fear like a blade. Order built on fear was never order. It was silence. And silence was always waiting to be broken. The predator released a low, resonant roar, not in anger but in declaration. It reverberated through the chamber, shaking banners, rattling armor. It was not the roar of a monster, It was the roar of something unleashed, something that chose. Every guard froze, realizing the creature was not chained, not controlled, but willing. And that choice terrified them most. The chair tried to reclaim authority, its light flaring. If you will not submit, then humanity shall face judgment. You will not walk free. Elias's eyes burned with defiance. I didn't come here to walk free. I came to show you the truth. And the truth doesn't care about your judgment. At that, the predator stepped forward, slow and deliberate, its claws carving grooves in the floor. The guards stumbled back until they pressed against the walls. The hologram of the chair flickered, shrinking as though retreating from its own stage. Elias laid a hand on the beast's shoulder and whispered, "Easy. They've seen enough." The predator obeyed, halting mid-stride, a living monument to the bond that none of the council could comprehend. In that stillness, the moment crystallized. No weapon, no speech, no display of force could undo what they had all witnessed. The galaxy's most feared terror yielding to the touch of a human hand. Beyond the chamber, the broadcast spread unchecked. Across empires, entire populations stared at their rulers and began to ask dangerous questions. Some with defiance. Some with wonder. All with the realization that the foundations of their order were not unshakable. The council had tried to cage a man and his companion. Instead, they had unleashed a story too powerful to silence. Elias turned his gaze upward, past the chamber's vaulted ceiling, as though he could see through it to the stars beyond. His voice carried, soft but unshakable. Let them come. Let them try to chain what they don't understand. We'll show them what it means to be human. The predator rumbled deeply in answer, and together they stood, man and beast, an image already etched into legend. And in that instant, the galaxy trembled, not because of the predator's roar, but because humanity had stepped into the light, and nothing would ever put them back in the shadows again.